John Richardson, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, man, it's a beautiful morning.
It is. It's beautiful here in Ponte Vedra. Is it beautiful where you are?
Yeah, I'm in West Grove, Pennsylvania, and it's been amazing. My wife and I just got a brand new set outside with some nice chairs, and they kind of like face the sun off the deck. So I was like out there this morning with a blanket reading. I was like, dude, this is the life.
That's awesome. Every morning I wake up, the first thing I do is just thank God for air in my lungs and blood in my veins. Every day I wake up is a gift, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've been doing cold showers in the morning, mostly because there's no guarantee I got much sleep with the kid. So it's like my way of like being like, okay, cool. Like you're up no matter what, and it's like the shock to the system. I feel like I make every excuse in the book and then I hit that the cold water hits me for like 5 minutes and I'm like, all right, cool. It doesn't matter. You're moving.
Yeah. Have you been doing cold showers for a while?
I have. So yeah, I was doing it for a few months leading up to my daughter being born, and it's just been like a godsend since she's been here. But I find it tremendously helpful just to kind of like hit that switch. I've never been a huge morning person, but I love time to myself. And for the longest period of time, that fell more towards the nighttime. And then as I started picking up with work, opened a second business, it really put the demands on me to have to get up earlier and earlier. It just became part
Hmm.
of my reality. And the cold showers were like a huge integral part of being able to accomplish that and not just be like a complete miserable mess.
Cold showers are like anything that's hard. It's never regret after it's over, but doing it, you're just like, why would I do this? But it's so
Yeah. I had just yesterday, I interviewed a guy named Matt Chenard, and he became basically pretty popular on Instagram for the past 6 years. He fixed some autoimmune conditions that he had through doing ice baths in the morning,
Hmm.
and then he decided to start more or less recording him doing this and giving talks while he was doing it, and it became his thing. And I asked him, I was like, so like on an average morning, on a scale of 1 to 10, one being like, I absolutely would rather die than get in this tub, and a 10 being like, okay, like I can deal with the cold for a few minutes. Like, where do you fall? And he's like, it's almost always a five.
Okay.
You know, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like he's been doing it for 6 years. So it's like, I don't think we ever actually want to get in the water. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like you're a runner, which we'll talk about here a lot in a second, but it's like sprint intervals, right? Like there's just disgusting paces and intervals that you can run that like you never actually want to run. It's like the feeling of having done it and the feeling of like accomplishing something is what we really chase. But like being in the middle of that and you have that like you hit that lactic threshold and you got that muscle burn you just like can't get rid of,
Hmm.
like that sucks. Like in the moment, that sucks. And I would
Right.
equate that to what it's like being in ice water.
Yeah. Well, people always ask, like, when does it get easy? And I'm like, never. It doesn't. You just get more fit, and then it gets harder. It sounds like ice baths. Same thing. I mean, the water doesn't get colder, I don't suppose, but it's just miserable always. It sounds like.
Sure. Yeah. And well, and I think that that's why it's just that much more important to accept that you never want it to actually get easy.
Right. Hard things are good things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Alex Hermosi, was quoted recently saying like this is what hard feels like whenever you're
Hmm.
going through something tough, like reminding yourself of the fact that like this is what makes you something worthwhile, right? Like and
Right.
being okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. No matter what in life, you're going to have hard things, and if you can battle test them when the stakes are pretty low, you'll be hardened for when the stakes are high.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah, resiliency, man. Well, hey, John, I really appreciate you coming on. I love that we just dove right into conversation here. You and I had a chance off mic to kind of get to know each other quite a bit, and for me to get a little bit more information on your story. You were the 300th American to run a sub 4 minute mile. Was this something that you were aiming for, or was this something that became as a byproduct of you training for other track events?
It's definitely something that I thought about. So I ran a sub 5 minute mile when I was in middle school. And I think around that time is when I started to be like, okay, I'm pretty good at this. And up until that point, up until like I think my eighth grade year of middle school, I hadn't been a great track athlete. And in fact, I actually got cut from the middle school track team when I was in sixth grade, which when I think back on it, it's shocking that a middle school cut kids that wanted to run track, but I was cut. And I think that at the time it didn't become like a life lesson, but I do remember going to the coach and being like, why didn't I make it? Like, there was a sense of, I'm going to stick up for myself, a sense of like, I want this, now I'm going to pursue it. And that I don't think was like a super pivotal moment, right? When I look back on it, my whole life changed, but I think that did shape that, I can change the future if I take ownership of it. So rather than just quit and never run track again, I was like, no, I want to make the team next year. So I started thinking about that. Then when I ran the sub 5 minute mile and had success at track, that was what I decided I wanted to do in high school. It wasn't going to be playing soccer. It was going to be focusing on running. And around that same time, I started just paying attention to professional track and field, collegiate track and field, and identified myself as a miler and thought, yeah, it would be really cool someday to run sub 4 minutes for a mile. And it happened my senior year of college. And one of the things about track and field is like you can be in shape to run a certain time. Same thing with like Olympic weightlifting or, any sport where you have a really small window of opportunities to do something. Like you could be super strong, you could be super fit, but you have to do it on that day for it like to legitimately count. So I had been in shape to run a sub 4 minute mile for a couple of years at different times, but I had never done it in a race. So that day, I woke up feeling really good and ended up running sub 4, and it was great. I mean, it's definitely something I hang my hat on in terms of like feeling personal accomplishment. I think it's something that people acknowledge as an athletic feat that kind of stands alone on its own, and people understand it. Everybody's run a mile at some point in their life. They associate sub 4 minutes with success. It's not like like the equivalent deadlift or something like that might just get lost in people's perceptions of what is hard, right? They can't even understand how good it would be. But I think the mile is something that people do. So it's definitely a cool thing that I'm proud of. And it was something I identified for a long time.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. I mean, it is so true that I think of this every time the Olympics are on and people watch something like Olympic weightlifting, and they just have like, they're completely out of touch of how difficult the thing that is being accomplished on the screen looks so simple. Like, and I think that's part of the problem is they make it look so easy that people don't just like lose a sense of appreciation for how crazy some of those numbers are. But because most people had to run a mile at some point in their, elementary and middle school and high school gym classes, they can appreciate the speed that it must take to run a sub 4 minutes.
Yeah, totally. And, what's interesting is that sub 4 minutes happens all the time now. Like high school kids now are running sub 4 minutes like regularly. And that is a whole nother thing about technology. But the achievement of itself is relatively common in terms of like the higher echelon track and field. But there's still something that's super satisfying for anybody that does it. Even if like when I did, I think I was 10th on the descending order list in the NCAA. It was a top 10 NCAA time. Now it might be a top 70 time, but still people chase it as if it were still like this holy grail. So it's
sure
stood the test of time.
Yeah. And well, every sport has those metrics that end up becoming kind of landmarks, if you will. So I was going to ask you, coming from more of a weightlifting background myself, there's always numbers in all of our pursuits that end up being the things that taunt and tease us. So for instance, like for me, it was like a 275-pound snatch, right? Or it was like a 350-pound clean. There were numbers that for the longest time I would like flirt with and get close to, and then would fall back down underneath, right? And my training cycles would be this constant battle with those numbers. And over time, they begin to taunt you. Were there any times for you that were really hard to get underneath with running?
Fortunately, I think I finished my career like on the better side of any metric, like sub 8 minutes for 3,000. I hit that. Sub 150 for an 800. I hit that. One that I wish now, I didn't care as much at the time, but like I wish I had run a sub 14 minute 5K. Never did that, but I was relatively close. If I was on the wrong side of 4 minutes, I think it would eat me up, right? If I had finished at like 4 minutes 0.1 or something, like I would have a tough time. I'd live with it, right? Like I wouldn't have a choice, but I'm glad that I'm on the right side of it.
Yeah, there was the documentary that came out probably a couple of years ago now about the guy. They were creating basically perfect conditions for him to try to run a sub 2 hour marathon. And I believe his first attempt, he ran like 23 seconds over.
Yep.
I was like, dude, like if you spread that out over 2 hours, like
It's
to
like
think
nothing.
about that, it's wild, right? And then
Yeah.
I thought that he was so humbled, and in the way that he talked about it afterwards is he basically said like, I am the one that will demonstrate to others that we're this close. Like it's
Mhm.
possible. And he's like, I hope that my effort will be the leverage needed to get somebody else to convince themselves to train to accomplish it. And I love that because like, to your point, like it probably eats him up to this day, and I do think he actually went back and finished.
Yeah, he did. He
But
got
in
into.
that the first attempt where they documented, and there was this 2 hour documentary on it, he failed by like 20 some seconds. And I just remember watching this and being so heartbroken for him.
Yeah. Well, there's a moment in that race where he like still believed he could do it. And then like it crossed over to like, it's not going to happen, but I still have to finish and it still sucks no matter what. Like
Right. That's
after
true.
2 hours
Right.
of struggling, you're just coming in, still trying to run fast because it's the fastest anybody's ever run, but you're not achieving what you wanted. I'm sure that was a bittersweet moment. And, he has since run sub 2 hours, but that like you were talking about how it makes other people believe something's possible. Like the marathon world record's just gone nuts since that happened.
Sure. Well, and I think it was back in the early 1900s when the first sub 4 minute mile was broken, because there was a guy, basically there was a bunch of they weren't even exercise scientists because they didn't exist back then, but basically there were like physiologists and people in the sports world that believed that it was not just physically impossible, but like you could die in attempting a
Mm-hmm.
sub 4 minute mile. And then once it got broken a ton. So like someone broke the barrier, and then you just see this like wave of followers that also accomplish it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that just speaks so highly to the importance of somebody being brave enough to try to attack something like that, because they open the door for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was in the middle, it was in 19, I think it might have been 54, 55, 56, somewhere in there that Rogers Bannister broke for the first time. But like
Mm.
the world record was in the mid 350s shortly, just relatively few amounts of years after that. Like and you see it in the gym too, like whenever there's like a muscle up programmed or something, and one person gets their first muscle up, then like five other people do in later classes, because there's something about you don't want somebody else to have success and you don't. There's a competition component to human nature that really comes out when you see somebody else do something.
Yeah, no doubt. Now you went on to obviously like you took these accomplishments from middle school, high school, and found a love for track and field, and took it to college with you, and you became a two-time SEC champion, and are now pursuing some Ironman events. And you just recently qualified for is it the Ironman World Championships?
Yeah, I competed in Ironman Florida in November of 2022, and that qualified me for the Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii. Um, Long backstory of some things that have happened with Ironman, but I'll be competing in Kona in October 2024. So I have an Ironman coming up in 4 weeks in Tulsa, and I may qualify for the World Championships in 2023 at that one. But no matter what, I will be competing at Kona in 2024. And that was Ryan, like when you talk about having a goal and like being like really fixated on something, and it um, Derek, when you want something to happen and you really become fixated on the outcome, like the focus that you get from having that one thing, I hadn't felt that in a really long time. Like maybe even more than when I was in college focusing on sub 4 minute mile. And I don't know what it was about Kona qualifying for it. It was just really cool as like an adult that was like way past athletic prime, that I never thought I was going to be competitive at something again. I never thought I would like have a coach and train for something to like rekindle that competitive spirit. It was really neat. And on that day, like it came together, not well, like it wasn't good at all, but it came together well enough for me to finish. And I always thought, it's a 10-hour race. I was like 9:55 or something that I finished. And I had sprinted all the way to the finish, right? Like it was one of those things where I had to sprint to qualify. And after 9.5 hours, the last thing you want to do is like work hard to finish like fast. But what I realized is like, that's exactly what I wanted, right? That was the position that I was in, where I had to kick it in at the end of a marathon, at the end of a 112-mile bike, at the end of a 2.5-mile swim, was like, I envisioned that scenario every single time I was out training. It's exactly where I wanted to be. And fortunately, it pulled together and was able to get it done. But it was a really cool day.
I'm sure it was a hell of an experience. Now, as a strength coach myself, I'll admit that running is probably lowest on the totem pole in terms of things that I not just understand, but have this desire to understand. But I do listen to a lot of podcasts um, to learn more about running efficiency, and some, on both ends of the spectrum, right? Everything from like sprinting all the way up through Ironman and some of these longer kind of ultra marathonists. And one of the things that I've taken away from it is that they all recommend that although you might have your sights set on ultra marathons and these longer distances, that one of the best things you can do for yourself as a runner is to develop your speed. Now, would you say that your early years of developing those 4s, 8s, 12s, and 16s, in terms of your top end speed ultimately have kind of helped you as you've like transferred into these longer events?
Yeah, 100%. So I have obviously like a long running background, right? I ran competitively from 14 to 24 at, the highest domestic level that you could be at. But what I think really has helped me as an adult moving into a brand new sport of triathlon was the 10 years that I did CrossFit in between that, right? Like coming from this big endurance background, I never really lost that, right? I could tap into that when I needed to, but then having like the posterior chain strength, having just strong shoulders for swimming has one kept me like injury free, knock on wood, as I've been doing this training, the bulk of the training. But then also I think I'm at a huge competitive advantage because I can still deadlift, twice my body weight or whatever. I'm just way stronger than most of these endurance triathletes that are like quite frail, to be honest.
Yeah, there's I think you're starting to see this to become a much more common theme, which is there are people that are just almost like disproving the physics that we once thought were necessary in order to be able to accomplish certain things. I think of someone like a Nick Bear,
Mm-hmm.
who is now doing these ultra marathons all while doing these like intermittent like uh bodybuilding preps. And so
Yeah,
you
while
look at him and
being
you're like,
insanely jacked.
right, you're like bodybuilder, right? You see him and you immediately think bodybuilder, and then you realize like, okay, he runs like 20 miles for fun on Saturday mornings. And you're like,
Right.
these two things do not go together. I think we're seeing this
Mm-hmm.
whole new wave of athlete and what people are able to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree. It just shows, and maybe it's a move away from specialization, right? Like, because he's not obviously running the fastest marathon, but what I think it's showing is that you can be super well rounded at like the 95th percentile of like 10 different things.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that transfers to business as well, but I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole just yet.
Sure.
So what other, you spoke about CrossFit, and I know you got into that back in and around the same time that I had, in that like 2009, 10, 11 range. What do you do now to kind of supplement your strength for your Ironman training?
So I'm heavily involved in an organization called F3, which stands for Fitness Fellowship and Faith. It's a men's leadership group where we meet in the mornings and do various types of workouts, mainly like boot camp style stuff. So I do boot camps 2 days a week. It's a lot of burpees, push-ups, air squats, like CrossFit, gymnastics, and mobility type stuff. And then every once in a while, I'll get an itch to like power clean or squat. Um, I'm in the bulk of Ironman training right now, so I'm not doing a whole lot of weights because it's mainly just a time thing. Not that I don't want to, but in the off season, I would mix in probably like I call it functional bodybuilding, I guess, and mobility. My favorite lift though is power cleans. Like if I could just do a 20-minute EMOM of like 2 power cleans, that would be like my go-to.
So we just got to find you an Ironman where they just have like every mile you got to do 10 power cleans.
Yeah, just like one power clean at like 225 every mile. I might win the thing.
I wonder if I ran that event, like how confused the
They'd
sign-ups
show
would be.
up and be like, "What do you want me to do with this? Roll it the rest of the way?"
But again, like that speaks to the necessity of being well-rounded. Obviously,
Mhm.
you're going to look at the top 10% of people at that Ironman that are actually there to try to put together a competitive time and potentially win. But then you look at the rest and it's like, maybe it would behoove you to also do the supplemental strength and conditioning type, training.
100%. And that's such a good point. Like if you want to be tip of the spear, super specialized, right? Just run, bike, swim, maybe stretch and do some, lightweight exercise, lightweight calisthenics or something. But like if you just want to be a generally healthy, like GPP style and also excel at triathlon, you'd probably be better off swim, bike, running less and just getting stronger.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I got to take my hat off to CrossFit. I mean, they came in and revolutionized this space. And I think, not to say that, people like Nick Bear wouldn't have done it without that early presence of CrossFit. But I think that they were transformative in the way that they kind of showed up into the exercise science space and flipped it on its head and said, hey, like we have guys and girls that can, run a sub 5-minute mile and deadlift 500 or 315 for the girls respectively, at the same time, or within the same hour, whatever it is. And it's like some of these accomplishments that you're seeing these athletes be able to pull off, it's just demonstrative of like, not just the importance, but the capacity for the human body. Like we've never seen it before.
Absolutely. I see it in my training with Ironman, like the things that I can do now, and they're not like, necessarily like standalone achievement wise, just what my body's able to do and able to recover. Like humans are incredible, like endurance machines. But then when I see like what CrossFit athletes were able to do, and when you look back at like 2010, 2011, yeah, like at some of the events, they weren't very good, right? Like they weren't running very fast, but now they are. Now they're running like legit sub 6-minute 5Ks. Like they'd be fast enough. Like the top athletes could go win a local road race. And then they could also win a local powerlifting meet or an Olympic lifting meet or like do really well in gymnastics. Like there's nothing that they're not good at.
It's so funny you point that out because anytime at the CrossFit Games there is a new movement or modality introduced, it's always a laughing stock inside of the communities where that is their tip of the spear, where it's like that is their specificity, that is their thing. And I always think to myself, give them 3 years, like give them a couple years to play with it, right? Because it's usually like, for instance, they'll do like whatever, a half marathon row, and for the most part, like you see people out there like chafing because they weren't prepared. They're under fueled because they didn't realize how long the event was going to be. People's biceps are cramping up. Like you see all this weird stuff going on, and it's like, okay, wait until they repeat this in a few years and people actually start training some of these longer endurance events on a single modality and watch how close they get to tickling like the top 10% of times in the world. It's nuts.
Yeah, it happens in every single thing that they've introduced. Like they just get insanely good at.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a spectacle, but in all the best ways possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you still, I imagine you do, owning a gym, follow like CrossFit Games and everything?
Yeah, I mean, I'll always have a passion and a love for the CrossFit Games. I definitely think that it's a really steep uphill battle for them to climb, in that they have these competing efforts in branding themselves for the games and for the sport of CrossFit, and then for the vision and the health of the greater population, for the wellness side of things. And I think that's a really hard thing. I do not envy their PR department, because it's very difficult, right? And I think there's been this like ebb and flow where those two things have kind of come together at a certain point, and then they come away at a certain point and back together. And like, I can't even say, being in this game for now almost 12 years as an affiliate owner, I don't know the perfect combination. Like, I don't know how much influence we really should want from the games into the health and wellness side. And I don't know how much the health and wellness side should influence the games. It's hard, and I think there's no perfect answer, which is why you're never going to please everybody.
Yeah, I agree 100%. When the CrossFit Health started kicking off, I'm like, that's really cool. And that's really important. And I saw it then. It's like, how are you going to do both of these? Because they're completely opposites. Like the games is trying to be like tip of the spear, very specific on performance, and CrossFit Health and wellness and general physical preparedness of everyday gym goer. They're not necessarily at odds. They complement each other, but like, what's CrossFit's identity going to be?
Sure, right. And you can talk about it on a grander scale in terms of just the perception of the games versus the perception of the health and wellness side of things. And you can also talk it inside about it inside of the affiliate. Like, how much motivation does watching the games or having the open or having people inside of the gym take attempts at local competitions and train for specific things motivate the other people inside of the gym, right? So it's like they may recognize that, hey, maybe I shouldn't be doing a 21-15-9 with like deadlifts at my body weight and X, Y, and Z high skill gymnastics movements, but I can at least be in admiration of the fact that people are working towards that, and then come here and put forth my own form of intensity. It might look very different from you, but I'm motivated by seeing what is possible,
Yeah.
So like, I do believe some of that exists. And unfortunately, ego can take people sometimes a little bit deeper in those waters than they should go, but it's the job of the gym and the owners and the coaches to kind of reel people back in and make sure everyone understands their place in that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So at the moment, you said mostly you're spending your time outside of running, doing some strength and conditioning, but you mentioned that it's because you're somewhat limited by the amount of time that the other training takes you. So you're in the middle of a training block right now. What does that typically look like for you on not on the strength side, but on the actual running, biking, swimming side?
Yeah, I'll just take you through this week. So I'm 5 weeks out from Ironman Tulsa right now. Based on my training, it's anywhere between 15 and 17 hours a week, which for a competitive Ironman athletes, probably somewhere in like the middle to high end, right? Like pro athletes obviously are going to do way more. A weekend warrior is going to do way less. I'm self-employed, so I have the opportunity to be sort of flexible with my training. I don't have to cram it all in onto the weekends. But Monday, usually a swim and a run, anywhere between 3,000 and 4,000 yards swimming, 10 miles running. Tuesday's usually a hard bike ride, probably somewhere between 30 and 40 miles of biking, and then a short run off of the bike. Yesterday, I did a long run, so I ran 17 miles in the morning and then swam 3,000 yards in the afternoon. Today, 4,200 yards swimming. I'll go after we chat to the pool, do that, and then I'll bike an hour easy, like real easy in the afternoon. And then tomorrow I've got a long, probably 90-mile bike, and then 4 to 5 miles off of the bike. Saturday will be an easy run, and then Sunday I'll do a running workout. So no real rest days, but like, you train your body to be used to doing just this like insane stuff. When it's just an easy hour bike or easy hour run, it feels like a rest day.
So I got two questions off of that. The first one being, of all of that, what do you find the hardest for you?
Good question. The hardest for me competitively has been the bike. Like for some reason, I don't know why I'm not better at it. And I say that like with a bunch of humility for the fact that like, obviously I just got into the sport. So there's a lot of reasons why I'm not good at it. But I think about like, I can back squat pretty well. I have strong legs. I've got a great engine from running. Like, why is it not carrying over to the bike? And I haven't quite figured that out yet, but I know that I'm biking a ton, and that's becoming a strength as much as the other sports are. So biking was the hardest to adjust to. From a training perspective, I think I like swimming the least training. I love swimming, like just go in the ocean and surf, or like body surf, or just be in water. Awesome. I don't want to say hate. I just don't like the structure around swimming, because everything is literally like a workout. And I view like working out kind of like artistically. Like when you and I were chatting offline, you talked about programming. You really enjoy programming. I kind of like that too, but I like doing it sort of in the moment based on how my body feels. One of the things that's been an adjustment to triathlon is that it's so regimented. Like everything is a workout, and swimming specifically, like, you'll have a list like this long, and it's like drills, warm-ups, reps, blah, 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 on the send-off, certain times. And like, to me, I'm like, I just want to like exercise.
Right. So in other words, like you just want to kind of get lost in what it is that you're doing, and not have to be so fixated on your splits.
Yeah. And swimming especially has a lot of structure to it, which that's how you get better at swimming, right? So I acknowledge that if I want to be good at triathlon, I have to do this specific thing in a way that's going to yield the best result for me to maximize on race day.
Give an example, like what kind of structure is put in place for your swimming?
So there's always a warm up, and the warm up will be, I'm just making it up now, but it's probably coming from a real one. They had 400-yard freestyle, then it'd be like 300 yards where you pull. So like you put a buoy in, so you're not kicking your legs. You're using paddles to just help with technique. Then I'll do some drills, which are agonizing because you swim super slow and you make you feel like you're drowning, but it gets you better at your technique, right? So because you only swim fast from pulling and being in like streamline position, right? So propulsion and streamline. Anything outside of that, like any wrong movement, it's going to slow you down. So the drills help maintain good form, make sure you're pushing the water the right way. And then there'll be a main set, which will have varied degrees of distance, speed, and then rest. And it's all designed to get you to race faster at whatever distance. So for an Ironman, it's 2.4 miles continuous, right? So it's going to typically be longer sets than I think if I was trying to race a 50-meter freestyle. But the whole thing takes like an hour to an hour 15. And for the most part, it's just back and forth looking at a lean line. I don't enjoy that as much as I would enjoy. Like, I'd much rather just go swim for an hour and a half in the ocean and not have any structure and just like play. But that doesn't yield the fastest swim splits.
Sure. Yeah. Now, is in the Ironman race, where will the swim take place?
So Tulsa is the next one next month. It's in a lake. The one in Florida was in the Gulf of Mexico. And then in Kona, we swim in like Kailua, I think it's called Kailua Bay, which is, in the Pacific Ocean somewhere off of the shore. So growing up in Ocean City, New Jersey, where I was in the ocean like since I was born, all summer long, it feels like. So I had like a real sense for what the water does. Like there's a saying in swimming, like you feel the water, and I feel the water really well, just having grown up in it. So even though I didn't swim a whole lot competitively or for 10 years before I started triathlon, I just took to swimming really well. And especially in the open water, because I have I have a strong like appreciation for the danger of open water, but I don't fear it, right? Like I know my own limitation and my own insignificance in terms of what that water can do to me. But when I get in the water, I don't ever like panic like some people do.
Interesting. Well, true. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's probably, there's way more external factors when so for instance, like when you're running, it's like, sure, you could get hit by a car, but the likelihood of that is so slim, you probably don't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just so many more things that can go wrong in the water that it's probably easier to obsess about them if you're somebody where it feels out of place for you.
Yeah. Well, imagine just being surrounded by a bunch of people, like your face is in water where you really can't see anything, because most of like the lake swims or ocean swims on the East Coast, it's going to be not clear water. So you can barely even like see your hand in front of you, and you can't breathe as well. It incites panic, and your heart rate goes from, chill 70, 80 beats to all of a sudden it's jacked up to almost like as high as it can be right away. And you go from standing to prone. Like there's a lot of things that like physiologically incite a little bit of panic. And if somebody's not ready for it or just doesn't handle it well, like it's like legitimately pretty scary.
Oh, I can imagine. Well, my second question to kind of back that up a little bit is you're no longer in your early 20s anymore. So obviously recovery is going to be a huge part of this. And it's funny, like I feel like there's this like on the graph as recovery goes down in terms of our body's natural ability to do it, right? And at a certain speed, wisdom goes up. Right. You make less dumb decisions. You're not like, going for a bunch of beers right after your training session with the boys. You're not like getting 5 hours of sleep at night because you can get away with it. How much effort and emphasis do you put onto your recovery? And what are some of the things that you do to make sure that that's a point of focus?
I would say recovery is really important. The biggest two things that I've done is eliminate alcohol and prioritize sleep. So top of mind for me always is like, I want to get to bed early, and I don't like waking up. So I wake up around 5:45. So it's not like I'm sleeping in super late, but I also don't get up super early to train. Like that's just kind of my sweet spot. And like this Whoop band, I've been wearing Whoop for, 14 months, and it's made a difference. It kind of gamifies recovery for me. Like I try really hard to have a high recovery score. So that's helped. And then I'm not necessarily good at like stretching or like massage work. I'd probably be a little bit better in terms of that recovery. But for me, it's just a time thing. That's the only reason I don't. But age, certainly knowing your limitations as well. Like I'll listen to my body more than I would maybe even
Yeah,
5, 10 years ago.
for sure. Yeah, I wore a Whoop for probably the better part of 3 years. And the only reason I'm not wearing it anymore is because now I have the Apple Watch Ultra and I don't want to have two bands on my wrist and look like a total nerd.
Right.
But I
You
I
also
loved
don't
all
want
the
to see your
metrics.
recoveries. Oh, what's that? I'm sorry.
No, I said, well, go ahead. I was just saying that, like, I absolutely loved like the sleep metrics associated with that.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say you don't even want to see your recovery score now with having a baby. It's probably
No, well, that's a perfect point or segue to what I was going to talk about was like, I think one of the hard parts with an app and a wearable like Whoop is that obviously there's some degree to some inaccuracy, but I think Whoop is kind of like the tip of the spear when it comes to wearables for athletes. But with that said, there is the subjective and mental piece to it, which is like, how does the data, right, and the information it's giving you affect your perception of your training and recovery? So for instance, like, do you find it difficult or challenging when you have a day where you're like, I thought I slept well, and you find yourself in the red, and then like, does that force you to manipulate or change your training for the next day, or you just go, you know what, I'll push through it?
I wouldn't say that I ever change my training based on what it says. I almost kind of know ahead of time what it's going to say, but more often than not, though, um, it says it's better than it was. Very rarely, I'm like, man, I feel awesome, and then I look at it and it says like I should like take the day off. That hardly ever happens. Usually, it's the opposite. I wake up, I'm like, man, I slept so bad, I'm so tired. There's no way I can train today. And then it'll be like, green, good to go. And I'm like, all right, dude, suck it up. You got to go hit the training session.
Yeah. Now, are you finding any other metrics outside of Whoop? Are you doing any like DEXA scans? I know there's like Inside Tracker for blood panels. Are you doing any glucose testing?
No, again, not for a specific reason other than I haven't. Like all that stuff would be cool. I think generally speaking, what I've found, like I don't take any supplements. The biggest thing for me is just like if I'm happy and excited about what I'm doing, then the product is really good. And anytime I get like too weird about something, and I'm not saying that stuff's weird, but for me, that would be like another thing I need to think about. In addition to like, the stuff that I care the most about, like my wife and my daughters and my career and, like providing for them. If I was adding in another metric, I think I would become a weirdo. So for me personally,
Yeah.
I don't think it would be effective.
I was just curious because, to be quite honest with you, everyone that does endurance events, in my opinion, is a weirdo. So purely just because you got to have a little bit of psychopathy going on in order to want to go put yourself through that.
Yeah.
But all jokes aside, yeah, I mean, I just I see that people become so like hyper focused on all the metrics once they kind of get into that sphere. So I'll check back in with you in a few years and we'll see if
Yeah. Then I'm
you've
like
adopted or picked
hooked
up.
up to like all these things and
You
always
hooked up.
more.
Yeah, exactly. Talk to me a little bit about your nutrition. What does that look like?
So I've been a big proponent of intermittent fasting for a long time. I don't know. I probably followed a pretty, I was going to say pretty strict, but it's not very strict. But like a guideline of intermittent fasting, essentially just skipping breakfast. Ironman training has thrown that off quite a bit. One, because I need way more carbs than I did when I was not doing Ironman. Like when I wasn't doing endurance stuff, I actually ate pretty low carb. Now it's become higher carb just because I'm burning so much more. I need like quick calories. Um, and then I generally just, and I would give anybody this advice is like, just choose the healthy option the majority of the time and don't eat past full. And for the most part, your nutrition is going to be okay. I would say now that I'm working out more, I eat more as a natural byproduct. And I'd like to carry probably a little bit more body fat or overeat a little bit more than maybe I would otherwise when I'm in a high training cycle, because I think it helps me stay happier and also uh, less prone to like getting a cold or some sort of soft tissue injury.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I have always found that an interesting part of the conversation when you start talking about the very, very high end of athletics, in that it doesn't, it's not advantageous to be as low body fat as you possibly can.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think Matt Frazier was on a podcast and spoke about that, and it came to a surprise for a lot of people, which was that he went into the games intentionally trying to carry a little bit of extra body fat, knowing that is what was going to allow him to remain fueled in the later parts of the weekend. Because the reality is, when you're doing 2 to 5 events a day, like, you don't have the luxury of just being like, I'm going to go crush 4,000 calories in this, like, of whole food,
Right.
2 to 3 times a day. You know what I mean? Like, your body,
Yeah.
like, you're taking in what you can and manage in between all of these events, plus the nerves, right? Plus, like, this, like, variant schedule. And I'm sure with the Ironman training, you feel very similar. Like, it's probably harder to have these, like, whole foods, 5 times a day.
Yeah, it's just it's almost impossible. I don't want to say it's impossible, because I don't want to think anything's impossible, especially something that I could control like diet. But yeah, it's very, very hard, and it's a lot easier to just eat like an English muffin with some butter and then feel really good than try to do it some other way. Right? There's like a happiness component too, right? Like I like eating that food, so I'm going to.
Absolutely. It's funny. I don't know if you recall this at all, but back in like 2012, 2013, the paleo diet was like really, really like at the pinnacle of its popularity. And I would go to these local CrossFit competitions, and you see people walking around with like sweet potatoes and just like all the foods that were listed under what was acceptable in the paleo diet. And I'm like, bro, that looks disgusting. Like,
Yeah.
you are absolutely, there's like a 50% chance you're throwing that up next event.
Like they're eating like canned yams cold. Like, that's just not going to be good.
Right. Well, and it's just so funny because now it's the opposite. Like, you see the athletes walking around with like Sour Patch Kids and Skittles, and like sometimes they have pouches and stuff where they try to get a little bit more on the whole food side. But I guess people have lost that kind of dogmatic approach of like, I need to eat like a caveman. It's like, a caveman wasn't doing the CrossFit Games.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
yeah, exactly. So, in addition to all of this training that you're doing, you are a real estate agent in Florida as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, been doing that for 2.5 years.
And you just recently broke into the top 100 in the state also.
Yeah, in my Northeast Florida MLS. So there's 11,000 agents in the Jacksonville area. I was in the top 100 this last. However,
That's amazing.
Thanks.
Yeah. So how much of your kind of focus on success and tenacity for just wanting to continue and better yourself do you think transferred from the athletic side of things to the business side?
All of it. I feel like just how my college coach had a saying: you run the way you do because of the way you are. And like, the way I am, like, I just want to do a good job, I think, in anything that I say I'm going to do. I want to try really hard. This might be like a little bit of a people pleasing thing, but like, I want to exceed someone's expectations. I want them to be like, oh, wow, John was really good at that. Whether it be triathlon as a real estate agent, when I was in my corporate job, like, I always wanted my bosses to think like, oh, wow, he's a really good employee. Like, I'm glad he's on my team. I don't know if that's, it's probably like a work ethic thing as much as it is just, I want to achieve things. And I took the same approach to real estate. It was a brand new career for me. I didn't do it before we moved to Florida. I did something completely different, related in some skill set ways, that I carried that skill set over to real estate. But sales was completely new. Adopting a mindset of sales as service was completely new. Offering to help people for a career, that was new. So there are a lot of new things that I think were new from like a description standpoint, but weren't new from like who I am and what I've been doing my entire life.
Yeah. Maybe some of those people pleasing tendencies are coming from your loneliness in your Ironman training.
Right. Looking at a lane all like just totally alone. And I do most of my training alone actually as well, which I don't know if that's by design or just a circumstance of, the situation, but that solitude I think is a good thing for people.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now you and I spoke, off mic about your focus around confidence, not just within yourself, but in helping others find that in their own lives. Why do you think it's, a missing link for so many people?
I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Like, one is the fear of success. Like, what's going to happen if I'm successful, right? They're scared of that. Then they're afraid of attempting it and failing, right? So like that plays on it. They're afraid to be different because it's a lot easier to just to fit into a mold where you're average, right? It's not hard to be average. That's why it's average. And anytime somebody wants to do something exceptional, it takes effort and risk. And those are two things that people generally are going to be averse to. Like if you ask somebody, hey, let's do something that's risky and really hard, probably gonna be like, there's a human nature component to be like, I think I'm going to stop. So whenever I work with somebody that wants to achieve something, whether it be like personal training, running coaching, life coaching, business coaching, I've done coaching of all different kinds. It usually comes down to the fact that whatever it is that they want to do is a little bit risky and it's going to be hard. So the thing that I can do the most with a coach is just to develop like an inner confidence that regardless of the outcome, right? Like you might not be in control of that, but what you can be in control of is like the attitude with which you approach it and the amount of effort you put into it. And if you take care of both of those things, most likely you'll be successful. But even if you're not, it's a success in the fact that you tried. And if it means a lot to you, just don't stop trying because eventually you will succeed.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, I always, in all my experiences with highly successful people, I think one of the things I've come to appreciate is the fact that while the things they do are hard, they're also rather simple. And what I mean by that is they've just focused so heavily on eliminating so many other things in their life that like their lives look rather simplistic, So I would imagine that if we were to kind of zoom in on some of the stuff that you're doing, your day-to-day probably looks pretty simple because you've done such a good job of just like cutting out all of the things that don't matter to you. You brought up the alcohol piece, and I would imagine there's, some other things that you could lump in there of things where you're just like, this isn't for me, or at least not right now.
Yeah. And, like we talked a little bit about different measures of like glucose, the DEXA scan, all of that. Like you could apply that same sort of like thinking like that's going to move, monitoring that stuff will move the needle very small compared to like sleeping well and working hard when it's time to work hard. And I think I've seen that in other agents. So like, oh, well, should I do Zillow leads? Should I market this way? Should I invest in search engine? How many times should I post on Instagram? And that's all just a distraction from like picking up the phone and calling somebody or going and having like a really good conversation with somebody over coffee and like developing a connection. Like they always, I feel like people in general always want some external way that's going to be like super hard and move the needle very low. When if you keep it simple and just work hard at that, it's going to be way more fruitful.
Yeah, I forget who had this quote, but he was basically saying everyone that we see in our lives or that exists in the world that we view as a hero, he's like, they may have done something heroic, but they're just average people who have ruthlessly removed everything from their life other than the thing that you associate them as heroic.
Oh, that's good.
And I just thought that was like such like a cool framing because I was like, it's the perfect depiction of how someone is able to accomplish something that is just immaculate or very unaverage. Right. And it's like, it's only because of the fact it has more to do with the fact that they've removed everything else and become so passionate and fixated on this one thing than it is to say about their specific strategy on going after the thing that they pursue.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, and a lot of people don't realize that being successful at something usually takes a lot of time and a lot of consistency. And like, if you consistently work hard over a long period of time, whatever it is you're working hard at, you'll most likely be successful at. You just got to let time and consistency do its thing.
Yeah. I mean, this is all such great advice. If you could talk to teenage John now, what would you tell him in terms of advice of how to be confident?
That's an interesting question because I want to be like, hey man, like things are going to be pretty cool. Like if I like 19-year-old or 18-year-old was looking up 20 years, I feel like I'd be like, oh, wow. Hey, good job, future John. Like, I'm happy with that. I'd take that. So I don't know, man, if I knew now what I knew then, I would probably say eliminate some of the distractions that I let, the things that just I thought were important at the time, like really weren't. Like I probably would never, like if I could go back to college, right? I don't think I would party as much as I did. I don't think I would, I think I'd treat some like, I was a lifeguard in Ocean City, so I probably wasn't like the best boyfriend. Like I think I would just be like, hey man, like be more honorable, be a nicer person, focus on healthier habits. because all that stuff was just seemed fun in the short term, but it was not like important at all.
Yeah, I have a tough time with that one as well, because part of me feels the exact same way you do. And then the other part of me is like, yeah, but the other way to find good ideas is to make a lot of bad ideas,
Yeah.
right? Or like to find a lot of bad ideas, right? And it's easy in hindsight, what's the saying? It's like hindsight is science, the future is mystery.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's easy to kind of go back and dissect our past and be like, oh, I should have done X, Y, and Z and avoided A, B, and C. And it's like, well, yeah, of course, right?
Right.
Like your 85-year-old self would be giving you similar advice right now,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is why it's always interesting. So here's a fun, reframing flip. Is it's like, what would 85-year-old John give advice to you now? What would he tell you now?
I would think that he would say, keep doing what you're doing. Like it's clearly working. Adopt the same principles. You alluded to like keeping it simple, eliminate distractions, focus on what matters. I was thinking about this in my journal like the other day. It's like, what would 5 years of showing up consistently, working hard, like honoring God, honoring my family, like what would the residual effect of that for 5 years be? And that's like a pretty simple thing when you think about it, doing it for one day, like, eat well, work hard, go to sleep early, treat people with respect, and then professionally do the things that lead to success, right? Like on one small day that might not be yield like this huge outcome, but 5 years of that would be like tremendous. So imagine if you consistently did it for 20 years, and like the what might change for me. I might not be selling real estate. Maybe I'm leading a company, or I start a company. I have no idea what I'll be doing 10, 20 years from now, but like hopefully I approach the day the same way that I do now. So hopefully if the 85-year-old could speak, if John could speak to me right now, he'd say like, hey man, just keep doing what you're doing, even if it's not working in the immediate moment.
So you could wrap all that up into like appreciate longer time horizons.
Absolutely. Like, so we've talked a lot about fitness and Ironman, and like that's currently what I'm training for, or like what I'm competing in. I don't even want to say it's what I'm training for, because what I'm training for, and I've thought a lot about this, and I remind myself of it all the time, is a game of tag with my great grandchildren. Like, I want to be 85 years old, going up the playground and down the slide, like chasing like a 4-year old. And I think business wise or like professionally, like I want to be a guy that's like 60 years old. And you probably know somebody like this who has a ton of time and a ton of money and is insanely generous with both of them. And you have no idea what he does for a living. You're like, I don't know. He's like super smart. He's got a lot of money. He met me for coffee and it was awesome.
Well, and the hope is that at that point, the thing that they do for a living really just is something they're incredibly passionate about,
Mm-hmm.
and they have enough money in the right places to where it's earning enough money on its own to where they're able to give back, live the life they want, and be able to provide in a way that, makes them feel successful. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
hope, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
ultimate dream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
That's the funny thing about health span, right? And then financial wealth. It's like I don't think that there's no one has like differing views on like what they actually want with those things, right? Like, let me rephrase that. Like, I think the differences are actually rather minuscule in terms of like what the dream outcome would be. So like, for instance, like nobody wants to be like 65 and like scrounging for cash,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like nobody wants to be 65 and bedridden, so but like in terms of like the stories we tell ourselves of the exact thing we want to be able to do, that may differ a little bit. So for instance, in your case, like being able to play tag with your grandchildren, it gives you a very specific example of something that you want to be physically capable of doing. Like you can visualize that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that right there is the heart of what is going to allow you to reach it, is like being able to attribute it or attach it to a story, right? Because again, it's like how James Clear always says, like everyone has the same goal of accomplishing something. So for instance, like if you run a 100-meter race in the Olympics, like everyone wants to win, but it's the processes that we go through and that are going to determine whether we get there or not. And I think that what is going to ultimately allow us to stick to the process and be consistent, especially when times are tough, is the clarity of the story we tell ourselves about why it's important to us.
Right. No, that's really well said. And attaching that imagery, like I visualize this, right? Myself at 85 on a playground with my great grandkids. Like that is super motivating. And I don't have any pathway to get there. It's not like I'm literally training for that. Like I'm not playing tag right now. Well, I am, but I play tag with my kids, but not like I want to get good at tag. But that like just gives me hope that it can happen. And the same way, like I envision, 65-year-old John pouring into like a 25-year-old that wants some life advice or wants to talk to somebody that's wise. Like that motivates me. And I think with goals, a lot of people want to get super specific on like a number or something like this. And that might work for short-term goals. But like long-term wise, I think it's like you said, create a story around who it is that you want to be, and like the what and how is going to figure itself out.
Yeah, right. I always say like, it's not the perfect path, it's the right direction.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So you are, aside from the business, aside from all of your training, you are very family oriented. And you had mentioned that you spend far more time than you would like to admit in Disney World.
Yeah.
So
it's an embarrassing amount.
It's an embarrassing amount. Yeah. So what has propelled you to do that? Are your kids obsessed with it, or is it something for you and your wife that you wanted to that you wanted to provide for the kids?
Yeah. So when we moved to Florida, we went to Disney, and it was shortly after COVID, and things opened up, which was great. In Florida, things were open, and we went to Disney World, and it was really fun. And it was like and part of us moving to Florida was that we wanted to focus on like our nuclear family, make like really strong bonds there, and really like raise our kids in a place that like has our values, that we could be like outside a lot. So Disney World represented a lot of like this family centric thing that we wanted to do. And then we got Disney annual passes, and I made a goal that I wanted to spend 30 days in the park. I wanted to have 30 park days in the year that we had the annual pass. And it wasn't anything specific about 30. The main thing was like, I knew that if we spent 30 days in the park, one, we were spending a lot of time as a family. Two, like financially, I was in a good spot because I'm not like financially reckless. I wouldn't do that unless I could afford it, right? I wasn't just like racking up a credit card to pay for it. And then three, like that would be an enjoyable memory. And I know that I have a small window with my daughters. They're 6 and 7 right now, before they're into sports, and like that's dictating the schedule. And that could be like a whole nother podcast on like youth sports. But before they dive into that, and while they still think mommy and daddy are amazing and we're awesome and they love us to death and want to spend all their time with us, like I might have 2 or 3 years. So my wife and I were talking about it. It's like, why don't we just pour into this? And it's a fun thing. They're always excited to go. We always have a good time. Let's do it. So this is year 2 of annual passes. I don't know that we'll get 30 again. That was, like I said, like excessive. But it's a lot of fun, man. We create memories that we talk about all the time. We know all the ins and outs. So if somebody's watching this, they're like, hey, I got a Disney trip coming up, just message me. I'll tell you all the ways to make it work.
No, hey, good for you for realizing, just how precious these next few years are. I think as parents, I think that's been like, out of all the advice that I continue to get, I think that's the advice that I take in the most, is just genuinely appreciate each window for what it is, because it's going to bring its own challenges, but also its own joy and happiness. And it's not something that you can get again. I think of it almost like it's like your wedding, right? Mm-hmm. Like you get that moment and you better take it in, because unless you plan on remarrying 6 times over, right. And I can promise it's probably not going to be nearly as special every other time. Like
just you get returns.
Right. Like you get your moment, and I think with kids, it's the same thing. And we have to be careful not to wish it away when we're going through some of the challenges, because they are ultimately what make the more joyous occasions and memories that much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a good point. Like each age, like I love my daughters more every day than I did the day before. Like that love grows. My enjoyment with them has grown exponentially with their ages, but every age represented like a new thing. Like I saw you posted a picture of you with your daughter this morning. It was like she's a newborn, obviously. Like I miss that. I don't miss necessarily a newborn, but I miss that with my daughters, right? Seeing them at that age.
Listen, I'll fly you up here. You can, I'll give you the 3 a.m. wake up.
Right. But it's important not to wish it away, because it's gone literally in a blink of an eye. And people say that about like, oh, and they said that when they were little, and I just breezed right through it. And they say that now about 6, 7, 8, and then it's going to be teenagers, right? That's always going to go quick. So slowing it down, taking in for the moment is really important.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've said this before on podcasts, but the best advice I've ever gotten in terms of like, if you want to slow time down, you need novel and intense experiences. And you're definitely getting them at Disney World.
Right. Disney World is always, if anybody's like, hey, what's Disney like? It's always expensive. It's always overwhelming. It's always like annoying in some kind of way, but you always leave being like, man, I just can't wait to go back. It's really
That's such a funny description of Disney World.
Yeah.
I wonder how that would do on a commercial for them.
Hey, but as long as they go back, Disney's probably happy.
Yeah. Well, hey, John, thanks so much for getting on the podcast. I really appreciate this. Tell the audience where they can learn more about you.
Yeah. So my website for my real estate business has got kind of a mix of a couple things I'm into, but it's lovethefloridalife.com. So LOVETHEFLORIDALIFE, lovethefloridalife.com. And then on Instagram, it's John Richardson FL.
Awesome. Well, hey, this was a blast, dude. I mean, I thought our 20-minute conversation leading up to this was amazing, and this topped it 100-fold.
Yeah, man, it's really enjoyable. I could talk all day about sports, life, dad, all of it.
Yeah, well, I think we already kind of previewed the next conversation. Maybe we can talk youth sports and
right?
some of the pros and cons of all that. And
yeah, absolutely.
And, where that's headed. So, hey, John, thanks again for hopping on.
Thanks, Derek. I appreciate it.